So to introduce our speaker, I would like to tell you what a special person Jerry Davis is because of how much he does not act like a sociologist, which is what he's supposed to act like. So Jerry Davis has a PhD from a school that cares a lot about disciplinary purity. Jerry Davis was the editor of our fanciest journal for a really long time. So Jerry Davis has all of the disciplinary purity status that goes along with all of these markers. And then he says things like, and this is one of my favorite quotes from Jerry Davis, I start a lot of my talks like this. He says, organizational design is now a subfield of computer science. So if you're a sociologist of organizations, you should not give your field away like this. But Jerry Davis, what I like about Jerry and what I love about the talk that he's going to give is he is paying attention and he's seeing things that other people in our field don't see, and he's saying things that other people in our field don't say. And I meant to say this yesterday when introducing Mary. She sees things that anthropologists aren't looking at necessarily, and she sees things that people in the tech field are not looking at necessarily. So the reason that Andres and I are both excited about these keynotes is they have a point of view that is refreshing and important, and they are paying attention and they are awake, and so it's such a gift to hear from them. So please join me in welcoming Jerry Davis.
That was so nice. I'm just going to disappoint everyone just by regression to the mean. I have to say, I am so excited to be here after a day and a half of this amazing conference, because I got here and heard this diversity of talks and realized I have found my tribe. I didn't know that you existed, but now I'm so excited to know that you're all here and that we can hang out and come from it's like Indianapolis. All the freeways meet from diverse places and they manage to interchange on the 465. So really excited to be here. I want to thank Melissa and Nikki for inviting me, and Anita and friends for organizing this. It's really a big honor to be here. And I have to wonder, how have I never met Tom Malone before? What have I done wrong in life that I have not met Tom Malone? It's such a great honor to be here. So when you walked in, you heard some music in the background. That was the music of Greg Gillis, the mashup DJ, better known as Girl Talk. And as many of you probably know, Greg is from Pittsburgh. So I thought it would be appropriate to have that as the theme music, because the talk itself is also kind of a mashup. If you've paid attention to what people have said so far, Tom, Mary, Ben, Hanu, many others, Melissa in particular, you'll say, haven't we heard all of this before? But I'm going to mix it up to a slightly different beat. So it'll seem familiar, but it'll have a danceable sort of mashup format to it. I would like to start with this slide on the front. I wish I had the pointer, but I saw this again on Sunday. There's a painting by Fernand Léger that hangs in the Detroit Institute of Arts. I agree with Chris and friends that Detroit is underappreciated. Come visit us soon. Visit the Detroit Institute of Arts, which is amazing, and you can see this thing up close. What I love about this painting is that it's kind of a metaphor. I also agree that analogies and metaphors are really important to the way that we think about the world, as a speaker earlier today was pointing out. This one is like that for me. This is called Girl with Plant, and you see that it's got this thick outline of a woman's face. She's got a necklace, and she's got a shawl and a little thing on her dress, and there's this sort of flower going on there, and it's this really complicated, intricate pattern, and then you have these really super simple color blocks, like green rectangle and an orange square and a red square and a couple of yellow things and a blue rectangle, these really simple boxes that don't match onto the complicated thick lines behind it. And what this represents to me is this mismatch between the categories that we use to understand the world, like corporation and employer, and employee, and the world that we're actually encountering. We've got some very simple boxes and then a world that doesn't fit. As Mary said yesterday, we've got categories that made sense of a factory floor, and now we're living in some dispersed supply chain. So that's a metaphor that I really like to start out with. So I want to give an institutional orientation for the talk. If you're like me, shortly after lunch, you fall asleep head down, especially if you had carbohydrates. So I wanted to give you the sort of the overview of the talk so that when you fall asleep, you can wake up at the end, see that same painting again, and act like you heard what the talk was about. So So the West has traditionally used three broad institutions to organize human activities, make collective decisions, and distribute resources. This is Tom Malone's book talks about 4 of these or 5 of these. And it's kind of a concept that others have talked about as well, Art Stinchcombe and Charles Lindblom. Each one has their own academic discipline to study it. So organizations are beloved by sociologists, markets are beloved by economists, democracies are beloved by political scientists, and they all have useful things to say about the individual institutions, but they're not necessarily so good at stepping back and saying, what are the decision rules that we use to figure out, should this be done by a market? Should this be done by taking a vote? Should it be done by a hierarchy? So how should kidneys be allocated? How should electoral districts be drawn? We don't really have a meta-discipline to figure out which of these things we should be using. And I would add that algorithms, I'm going to claim, add a 4th category that changes the cost profiles and trade-offs among using all of the other 3. And so it changes the cost profiles within each institution, but also what trade-offs you have when you decide, nah, this should be done by a market and not by a hierarchy anymore. And so you can think of this as a societal choice in how we allocate making choices. And scholars might have something useful to say if we actually took this on as a question to think about. And that's where I'm going to end up with is we don't really have a discipline for thinking about the choices among these different institutions as far as I can tell. So that's kind of where I'm going to end up. So I'm an organization theorist. And this is a really dark time to be in. This is a great place to be one because Carnegie Mellon is the birthplace of organization theory. This is sacred ground for people in my field because March and Simon invented our field in 1958 at the predecessor to the Tepper School. So this is sacred ground, but it's also a really dark time to be an organization theorist because they keep disappearing. So here's a shocking fact that the number of corporations listed on stock markets in the US has dropped by half over the last 20 years. So the high point was in 1996, and it's been declining almost continuously ever since, no matter what else is going on in the market. And it wasn't just the dot-com, it wasn't just 2008, it isn't Dodd-Frank or Sarbanes-Oxley, and it's not coming back. It's like we've asymptotically approached this minimum number of public corporations, and that's odd. You might say that is because industries are all getting more concentrated. Look at airlines. But that isn't really what's happening across the economy. I looked at every publicly traded corporation and where they all ended up after 2000, and it really isn't a simple story of consolidation. Yes to airlines, sort of to banking. That doesn't really make sense across all of the others. So if you want to go through and read why all of that is, you can look up one of my papers that's got a bunch of data in it. And to sort of put a point on what this looks like, this was the Dow Jones Industrial Index companies in 1988. So the 30 companies that represent the best and brightest of corporate America, the indicator of America's corporate might. And here's the list of those companies in 1988. And here's who's left in the index today. So there's about 6 or 7 of them left. United Technologies is about to do something interesting, and they may or may not stay listed there. Now, Sears still exists at the moment, but I would not put my pension plan on it. Similarly for Boeing and IBM from my perspective. But what you see is that it's not that Bethlehem Steel has bought all its industry competitors and now dominates, or that Eastman Kodak has bought its competitors, or Navistar International. Most of the people in the room probably don't remember what Westinghouse was, even though it was this major Pittsburgh institution up until the mid-1990s. So this is kind of like going to your 30th high school reunion and then looking at the football team, and they're all like morbidly obese and bald and kind of alcoholic, and GE would have been the quarterback, but now it's living in a halfway house, so. So that's kind of weird. It's not just that the big guys keep getting bigger. That is not what the story is behind this. And if you're sort of a big fan of Schumpeter, you'll say, yay, it's creative destruction. Get rid of those awful old companies and replace them with Google and Amazon. And that isn't happening either. The old ones are kind of evaporating or limping along, but they're really not being replaced. So this is the number of IPOs per year in the US from 1980 to last year. And you will notice that, like Furby's, and Vanilla Ice and Clinton administrations, IPOs are a 1990s era fad, and they're not going to come back. So even if Uber goes public or another unicorn goes public, we are never returning to a period of having lots of public corporations the way that we did. There's not going to be a flood like there used to be, and that's weird. That should be puzzling to us. Like, the market tripled under Obama, yet the number of IPOs did not. It's gone up under the current guy, whatever his name is, but we are not seeing this rush of IPOs, and that should be puzzling to us. Why the heck not? And so as a person who's devoted their life to studying public corporations, this is a big mystery to me. So you have to kind of start by asking, why do we have corporations in the first place? And the most popular argument, a basic thing you learn in economics, is it has to do with transaction cost. That Ronald Coase published this lovely article in 1937, The Nature of Firms, to try to answer, why do we have giant corporations? Why do we have firms at all? Markets are always smarter than their participants. Why does it make sense that we have big companies employing lots of people? And Coase says the main reason why it's profitable to establish a firm would seem to be that there's a cost of using the price mechanism. The most obvious cost of organizing production through the price mechanism is that of discovering what the relevant prices are. And his point was that using a free market is not itself free. If you've ever driven to a shopping mall to buy stuff, you know that things don't just appear magically. Like, there is a cost to looking at what are all the alternatives, a cognitive effort to compare them. You might have to hire a lawyer to negotiate a contract. So sometimes, if you're going to make Model A's in bulk, if you want to make thousands and thousands a year, sometimes that's the cheapest way to make Model A's, and it's cheapest to have the steel factory right on site rather than buying it separately. So a reason to be vertically integrated to have a firm is the cost of using the price mechanism. But imagine this thought experiment, this science fiction world where everybody carried with them a tiny supercomputer communicator that allowed them to look up the prices for everything in the world all day, every day, and they could create contracts for inputs with random strangers and track their performance in real time. And I realize this sounds like a kind of Black Mirror episode that's too bizarre to imagine. So we've been living through this experiment for 12 years now, where everyone in the world can look up all facts. And if you teach undergraduates, what I love about this is they all know from a very early age that factual information is never worth learning or remembering. The very concept of learning facts just seems bizarre to them. Like, why learn the formula for kurtosis if I can look it up on my damn phone? Like, why remember how many branches of government there are? I can just Google it if it ever becomes important. So in this world, if Coase is right, what is it that happens as a result? And the answer is that you would get pervasive outsourcing of the production and distribution of goods and services, or in other words, Nikeification. I'm delighted to say if you Google Nikeification, I own 8 of the top 10 outcomes, and I own the definition of this term. Trademark. Ka-ching. Now I feel like Shriram with the business. No. Turns out there's no money in naming things. And the US economy, as you all know, is at an advanced stage of Nikeification. It's very difficult in the US to buy a product manufactured by the company whose name is on the label. And it's not just Nike, it's like, name the Ford, Boeing, they might make their stuff. But it's pretty pervasive, and there's a transaction cost rationale for it. So if you buy a TV, odds are good it's a Vizio. Vizio got the largest share of televisions in the US around 2007 with 196 employees in a strip mall in Irvine, California. They just contracted for the production and distribution of the televisions, and they beat Sony, basically drove them out of the television business because Vizio is a lot cheaper than Sony. You can contract for anything now. If your dogs and cats get sick, blame Canada, those basketball trophy stealing monsters from the Great White North. All the pet food in America was made on the same assembly line in Ontario by Menu Foods. They put different labels on it, but it's all made from the same horse parts that are polluted with the same melamine. So, and Turns out all the tomato sauce in America is made by Demestri, like one of the former Kodak factories in Rochester, New York, makes all of the tomato sauce. So if you have Mama Tucci's delicious Sicilian recipe, write it down, send them an email, and they will produce it and put an authentic artisanal label and get it into store shelves. You don't need to actually buy a factory to start making this stuff. And the trickiest part of this is labor. It's like one thing to say flat screens, you can easily order them and outsource them. The labor part is the tricky one, but this is a one where the most interesting developments have happened in the last few years. So if you've ever been to a Home Depot parking lot in California between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m., you will see that there's a whole bunch of young men milling around in the corner. And if you don't know what's going on, you will be puzzled and say, yoga class, Pokemon Go, Scientology. It's like kind of hard to know what's going on. Turns out that isn't it. It is an impromptu labor market. This is where day labor goes. If you don't want to go to the trouble of a 1099, or Social Security, and you want to hire a crew for the day, the Home Depot parking lot. You show up with your pickup truck and say, I'm going to build a garage, I need a cement mixer, I need a carpenter, and I need a roofer, and here's what I'm paying. Bring them to the job site, do the work, take them back, and pay them in cash. So it's like a pop-up firm for the day. And that made sense for some flavors of labor, and it was trickier for others. That is a setup for the funniest cartoon ever published in The New Yorker. Yeah. Funny because it's true. So I had the CEO of Kelly Services who showed up, and the company showed up in Mary's talk yesterday. I had the CEO come talk to my group a couple of years ago, and he said, most of the people you encounter in any office of any Fortune 500 company are temps, vendors, and contractors, not employees of that organization. We're the largest employer of PhDs in the United States. I said, that is nonsense. He goes, nope, it's true. All those people that are doing drug tests at Merck and Pfizer, they're temps. We send them for 6 months, they do the job, and they go like, huh. And as you all probably know by now, Google, a majority of the people working at Google do not work for Google. They're TVCs with the red badges, and they don't get the free beer and so on, as Mary was describing yesterday. So this has already happened in the white-collar work world. There is an Uber for everything now. And hence, I'm trying to make Uberization, I want to own that definition like I own Nikification, because I have a specific term for it. So the creation of impromptu labor markets enabled by smartphones in which buyers and sellers can connect for the performance of specific tasks for specified fees. So the ability to hire somebody mobily. I mean, it's hard to do from your PC, but it's easy to do from a phone. So hiring people for specific tasks. And it's easy to imagine for cab drivers, but of course you can do it for lithotripsy. There are now doctors who do this online. If you've got a UTI and you need a prescription, there's somebody that'll claim to examine you and send in a prescription. So it's not the level of skill that's going to determine whether something is Uberized, it's the level of firm-specific assets, which Oliver Williamson would have said. If you can specify the work at whatever skill, it could in principle be Uberized. And this turns the world into a Home Depot parking lot. So you can think of a lot of ways when this would be good. So I was at the Academy of Management conference in Chicago, and the hotel has a Starbucks in the lobby, and there's 2,000 people waiting in line, and there's 2 people operating the Starbucks, like taking the order and pressing the button that says double espresso. And I was thinking, why doesn't Starbucks just have a bat signal that says, come in for an hour and we'll pay you $50 right now. If you're a qualified Starbucks person, show up, we'll pay you for an hour because we have so many people. It's like, that is not a half bad idea. Like, why don't they? I mean, I can kind of think why, but that seems like a pretty good idea. There's a lot of, they would be selling a lot more coffee if they were going quicker during that time. Part of the trick is, can you evaluate the quality of the work that they are doing? And so if you, so we were talking about different terms for weed that you don't know, like Kush. So I'm here to tell you that So that weed is legal in many parts of the United States, but if you go to Singapore, make sure that you have cleared out your luggage because they execute people for drugs. So just so you know, be careful next time you go to Singapore. And when you go through passport control and they haven't executed you, you get this nice rating system where they ask, how did you do this? And after a 26-hour flight, you head to the restroom, inevitably. And you also get a chance to rate the person. And what I love is the Adam M. Grant part of this. It's not just some anonymous toilet cleaner. It's Wang Cheng. You get an actual picture of the guy who has cleaned this toilet. He looks very happy, and you've got the different rating system. And at the bottom, this screen is sanitized regularly, which is fantastic, because regularly includes once every quarter. So, I don't know. So, inevitably, someone at Accenture and the various professional service firms are figuring out a way to make all of this leap to your phone. It is inevitable that it's not going to be little kiosks in the airport, but you get pinged and you have some incentive to give the ratings like you do with your Uber driver. This is from Black Mirror. As we all know, everything that ever happens in Black Mirror comes true within 24 months. Like, do you remember the second season? They had this obnoxious cartoon character who was offensive and awful and then ran for political office as a joke? Yeah, everything that ever happens in Black Mirror eventually comes true. And so this is clearly going to happen. And it opens up some really interesting possibilities, which is, could we imagine an employee-free Walmart? And I say utopian, dystopian thought experiment. So if you're a huge fan of Ayn Rand's works, then this is a utopian experiment. And if you're over the age of 22, this is a nightmarish dystopia that you never want to see come true. What would this look like? As of 2018, Walmart had 2.3 million employees. It's the world's largest employer. It's the largest employer in the United States and Canada and Mexico. Walmart is really, really big. And as you also probably know, Wall Street hates having employees. Wall Street hates firms that provide jobs, especially if people are paid for them. Like, everything about Wall Street militates against having employees, and that's why some of the things Ben talked about yesterday. So suppose Walmart wanted to evade this by getting rid of almost all their employees. So you would have their associates transition to self-employed micro-entrepreneurs, each one organized as an LLC. This actually happens on job sites now, where general contractors require all of their workers to organize as LLCs so that they don't pay Social Security. So they actually organize every person in the workforce. So that part's already got a precedent to it. And instead of training them, that's costly and they don't get to hang on to it. Instead, self-training, or investing in human capital, is self-funded and provided by community colleges or third-party vendors like Amazon, and you would get a badge, a certification badge for the specific roles that you know how to do, like checkout or warehouse or shelf side. I realize these are being done by robots, but there's probably something that happens in Walmart that won't be done by robots yet. So you will get certified for that job. And the evaluations will be automated using that phone thing, but also the speed at which you do the job and smartphone-based consumer ratings. So you've got some rating from 1 to 5, just like Uber drivers do. And here's the genius parts. The qualified associates, if you're above 4.5, this means you're eligible to use the UServe app to bid for shifts within commutable distance. So you'd pop open your phone and it'd say, there's 7 Walmart stores within 30 miles. That's the amount that you are willing to commute. And here are the available shifts. Put in your bid. And then Walmart will pick the number that they need from the lowest bidders. They'll have surge pricing. So on Friday night, people are being paid $30 an hour, but on Monday morning, they might be getting $5 an hour. And as you know, if you've used MTurk, contractors don't have a minimum wage. And so depending on who the Secretary of Labor is and how they're enforcing laws, it is not implausible to see this as a way to entirely avoid the minimum wage. And as you may also know, sexual harassment laws don't apply to contractors. At least this is what the lawyers, not that I inquired. How do I back out of this one now? How about them Lakers? But if you're the type of person that loves to harass but doesn't want to go to prison, hire contractors because they are not protected in the same way. That's one of those boxes from the first slide that doesn't fit anymore that Mary was talking about. So what this means is that there wouldn't be a set wage for the job. It would just vary by market pressures over the course of the week. Ayn Rand heaven. There is no set wage. It just varies according to the demand out there in the market. Because this is America, you will be your own boss. You will choose your own hours. You will be codependent no more. This will free you from the shackles of the feudal corporate manor. Okay, so this seems pretty much inevitable to me. Like within the next 18 months, it won't be Walmart, but there will be firms that adopt this model, is kind of my prediction. So as John Mayer and Brian Rowan put it in 1977, the building blocks for organizations come to be littered around the societal landscape. It takes a little entrepreneurial energy to assemble them into a structure. And I love this because it's poetic. It used to sound poetic 40 years ago, and now it just sounds blandly descriptive of the world that we actually live in. And so we're now in a place where folks like you that know what API stands for, which no one in our field does, like American Petroleum Institute. So this is why the nerds of the world, which I say in the sweetest possible way, why the nerds of the world will rule, because you will create organizations like Circuit City version 2.0. So Circuit City got liquidated in 2009. It's still got some ugly buildings left behind, but at a fire sale, this company in Long Island called SystemX bought the brand name, the web domain, and the logo, and they repopulated the old Circuit City website, but all of them were linked to third-party automated order fulfillment companies. And so they would ship it to you with the Circuit City label on it, but it would actually be some external vendor, which seemed ingenious because they had done the best thing that Wall Street could ever imagine. Circuit City with 0 employees, just a website that was connecting to these external these external devices. And it seems to me that this was proof of concept of how websites can replace organizations entirely. So imagine you say, I've moved to Pittsburgh, I'm rich now because I'm a faculty member, I want to have a 60-inch screen mounted on my ceiling so I can lie in bed on Saturday and watch British Bake Off and have speakers surrounding me. And so you'd go to the website like the old Dell site and put in a bunch of requests, and then it would instantaneously look up the prices, as Coase would have predicted, and assembly, and bringing it to your house and mounting, and 2 milliseconds later would come back with a price, and you would say yes or no. And so at that point, a web page has replaced what a firm did. It is basically a website is a set of calls on resources, and assembling them and creating a kind of performance in the form of a web page that you see. But that same basic logic, it seems to me, applies to assembling and delivering goods. That you could put out calls to resources and put together products and bring them to people. And in that point, the algorithm or the site kind of replaces the organization as a device. It can be all contractors all the way down. So this is the last thing for which I want to claim credit, is the phrase web page enterprise. So it coordinates inputs to create outputs through software and algorithms rather than through a hierarchy, the way that a web page coordinates calls on resources to create the output on a browser. Firms have already laid down the tracks for this. Because of Nikeification and Uberization, we're already at a point where you can find the prices and order up services. The web page can kind of unite them and create outcomes. I think some of Melissa's work actually looks a lot like this. So basically finding mechanisms to call on resources, put them together, and create a kind of an output. And so for me as an organizations person, this really is a Herb Simon thing, because he also pioneered artificial intelligence, and he thought organizations are a lot like computer programs. That was his dominant metaphor for thinking about firms. This just takes Simon to his logical conclusion and says, replace the firm with the website. Then we don't need costly corporate headquarters and corporate jets and overpaid CEOs. You know, codependent no more. So you might say, great, now we will have a world of all markets, and this will be magical because markets do everything that everyone in the world wants. If you hang out with those people that were saying, Atlas Shrugged is the greatest novel of the 20th century, man, Ulysses is stupid. So if you spend time in that world, if you ever say, I wonder if there's any role for governments to do something useful, they will inevitably point to Hayek's 1945 article, proving for all of eternity that socialism is doomed and will never work, and that central planning can never actually happen. So you should go back and read this now and see if you can make it through the first 2 pages without smirking, which I could not. So basically Hayek's claim is no central planner can have access to all of the knowledge in the markets, because at the transaction level, there's knowledge dispersed all over markets, and there's no way some central entity could have access to all of that knowledge. I mean, he was kind of imagining Stalin getting a bunch of 3x5 cards saying, here's what the farmers in Ukraine got for this 100 bales of cotton or something like that. So the data from which the economic calculus starts are never for the whole society given to a single mind which could work out the implications, and can never be so given. So mostly in social science, we can't falsify stuff because people don't say things like that. But imagine a Black Mirror episode where there was an online platform that didn't just have price and quantity information, but detailed data on consumer preferences, willingness to pay, prior purchasing history, vendor shipping times, user ratings of quality, detailed reviews, facial recognition, your blood type, the last time you went to the bathroom. All of this at the level of individual consumers and individual firms for everyone in the industry. Imagine this bizarre, nightmarish world that seems to disprove Hayek ex ante, I'm willing to say. We could just delete this from AER, but maybe that's just me. And they do really sell everything, as you already know, including the world's greatest. So who does not have an Instant Pot yet? Wait, seriously? You do not have an... Come on, leave this room right now and buy an Instant Pot. It is gonna change your life unambiguously. I'm not kidding about this. The Instant Pot really is amazing, and they're bargain. It's like $100 and it will change your, it's very hard to imagine a kitchen appliance being a good idea. Like if you were saying, I'm gonna rechange industry and become a billionaire by creating a kitchen appliance. Like, immersion blender? Like it doesn't seem plausible. But this thing has become a social movement. The best-selling cookbook in every category now is an Instant Pot cookbook. Halal cooking, Indian cooking, vegetarian, animal flesh, like you name it. Instant Pots are everywhere. That's a young people word, by the way. I hope this buys me some street cred. So it's designed and self-financed for $350,000 by Robert Wang. Note, venture capitalists are unnecessary to create enterprises. We don't have to bow before them. Marketing was sending Instant Pots to 200 influential food bloggers and cookbook authors and paying attention to all of the Amazon reviews. So Robert Wang claims to read every single review, and they've got literally tens of thousands of reviews. That is his research on the product. They sold 300,000 on Prime Day last year. The category is now worth $300 million a year from his $350,000, Canadian, by the way, $350,000 initial investment, 1.8 million members on the Facebook group, and its producer had just 50 employees outside Ottawa. So that's not quite a web page, but it is pretty damn close. It's like Robert Wang and 49 other people in a sad strip mall elsewhere in Ontario, probably near that pet food factory that puts the melamine in your stuff. But okay, it's not the entire economy, but it is a kind of proof of concept. All of the parts of an organization are available to rent rather than buy, and that makes it really easy to scale up and really easy to scale down. And you might say, great, corporations are evil monsters that destroy our society, but they also created the middle class and job ladders, and they give people health insurance and retirement security. We're kind of gonna miss these things when they evaporate on us, is my sense. This is a great time for entrepreneurs because you can go to Amazon, find something that's obviously overpriced, like dongles. They used to cost $50. and now they cost like $3. Just to find some overpriced thing where people don't care about brand, come up with a design, probably through Upwork, find someone on Alibaba to produce that thing, open up a Fulfilled by Amazon, and poof, you're an entrepreneur. So hundreds of people are doing basically that. They're scouring Amazon to find overpriced crap in every industry you can name, electronics, lamps and humidifiers, cosmetics, find overpriced stuff, and an entrepreneur can find a way to undercut that price on Amazon. Hooray, as Farhud Manjoo says, we're going to get better products for ludicrously low prices as big brands are outcompeted by disruptors, which is magical if you're a buyer and nightmarish if you're a worker. Unless somehow competitors on Amazon decide to use sleazy, underhanded tactics in a marketplace that has no court system to adjudicate how competition works. So what you discover is if one of your competitors wants to get you kicked off, they will pay 5 people in Romania to write badly worded 5-star reviews saying, much good, awesome product. And then you get kicked off for fake reviews, and Amazon doesn't have a phone number to call. If you build a factory to start making things to sell on Amazon, if you get kicked off, you're boned. There is a sort of court system, but not a real court system, and you kind of have no choice. So it's not necessarily the magical future world. There's a lot of crazy Tonya Harding stuff going on in the world of Amazon. The last thing I want to say in our remaining 15 seconds, wait, how are we doing? Buena, grazie mille. So this is like the voice of Christmas past and Christmas present. This is about Christmas future. Why do we have democracy in the first place? So I'm going to summarize the entire field of political science in one overhead. I hope I don't offend anyone. This is Teddy Roosevelt. This is a fun book by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. They were both writing a little over a century ago, and weirdly, they came up with the same diagnosis of second industrial revolution, industrial capitalism. And the short version is that imminent in capitalism is a tendency towards the centralization of industry and the centralization of finance. So Pittsburgh was the location of the world's largest merger in 1901, the creation of the first billion-dollar corporation in world history, which was U.S. Steel. And it was composed of Carnegie Steel and a whole bunch of competitors, and J.P. Morgan Chase lashed them all together and created the first billion-dollar corporation right here, Pittsburgh, PA in 1901. So industry became centralized all over. This is happening all across industries because of trains and mass production and a bunch of stuff that folks have written about. But the same thing was happening in banking. Now, a couple of bankers like J.P. Morgan had their fingers in all of these different industries, and that could be a bad thing. And so from Roosevelt's perspective, this is why we need a progressive movement. We cannot trust centralized capital. They will ruin our politics. They will create family dynastic dynasties like the French have. This is just a bad thing to have. It's like corporations are cheaper than the alternative, but they create real problems for democracy because of the concentration of wealth and power. For Lenin, that was like a feature and not a bug, as they used to say in your field. This means that if you've got a few banks controlling all of industry through a few industry competitors, take the banks and you've got the economy. So it made things very convenient if you wanted state control. So that was it, political science 100 years ago in one slide. Well, how does that apply to today? What are the entities that need to be reined in today? And what are the mechanisms out there that are changed because of information and communication technologies? So you may remember 3 years ago, people may still remember this, but it was a weird thing to go to like Central Park and have 300 people all looking at their phones, looking for Pikachu or some shit. I mean, it was a weird thing that grown-ups as well as kids were all getting together and cooperating, and their movements were being like, that was interesting. That felt like a sort of proof of concept. You can coordinate people as volunteers. Can you get 1 million people to show up to protest through one really good Facebook post and an app? The answer is yes. The day after the inauguration, 1 million people showed up in DC to protest. That is something we had not seen before, something with so low transaction costs. What would it look like if we turned this to the tech world? And I'd always been optimistic, but a little bit skeptical that this would happen. Suppose democracy comes to the world and the coders of the world unite. And it felt like this was always a possibility, but it kept not happening. And now it is. So within the last 12 months, Google plans not to renew its contract for Project Maven. Thousands of employees have signed a petition asking Google to cancel its contract for the project, nicknamed Project Maven, and dozens of employees have resigned in protest. An interesting one-off. Salesforce employees ask CEO to re-examine contract with Border Protection Agency. Employees asked that the company re-examine its relations with Customs and Border Protection, which they say uses several of its cloud products. More than 650 people have reportedly signed on. They are responsible for the tech that they create, and they're not happy about where their employer is going with that. We won't be war profiteers. Microsoft workers protest $480 million Army contract. Google workers reject Silicon Valley individualism. Last November, 20,000 of them walked out around the world, and it wasn't just because of the contract. It was sort of keyed off by a golden parachute to a sexual harasser who got fired. I guess it wasn't a contractor. But this is an unprecedented thing. 20,000 people walking out at a famously labor-indifferent kind of entity. That's a little bit weird. And they started putting together a manifesto saying, you got to treat the temps better. And they had sort of a list of demands. It was very interesting for them. Last one, over 4,200 Amazon workers pushed for climate change action, including cutting some ties to big oil. So it seems to me we're at this really interesting turning point that algorithms and ICTs have radically changed the transaction costs in these three big institutions, in democracy, in markets, and in organizations. And it's created this weird place where we have a choice, that we can guide things if we want to point it in the right direction, and we choose to do that. So I would reiterate the categories we use to map the economy are out of date. All of these things are intermingled. Is Amazon a market or an organization? Is it kind of a democracy? They kind of got a court system. The institutional trade-offs, though, aren't experienced as a choice. We are not asked, should this be done through a vote or through a market or through a hierarchy. It isn't our choice, but it is a choice. As a society, we're the ones that set those rules about how these things happen. This is why Uber is pervasive in the US and pretty much non-existent in Germany and France. It's not a law of nature that we have to do what technology tells us to. And I would say, can we optimize for democracy and economic security and not for shareholder value this time? This is now the 10-year anniversary that I published this sentence. Where is that workplace democracy app that will turn General Motors into a kibbutz? Which used to sound comical, but now it actually sounds entirely plausible. Why the hell don't we have that workplace democracy app that turns General Motors into a kibbutz? So that's it. That's what I got. All right.
So we're going to open it.
How about them Raptors? All right, Nikki.
So why hasn't it happened yet? What's holding this back? This sounds great.
It does sound great. I know that in my field, 19 out of 20 people don't know what an API is. So the notion that they should all learn Python and SQL and like start to code up apps for that, it just does not occur. We don't teach it in business schools. I would say, well, maybe at Carnegie Mellon, but the schools that I know, nobody leaves knowing how to code, and they think that they're going to hire people to do that. And so they think they're going to hire. Is there some tech way you can deal with this problem? But they don't know anything about the capabilities. And so they're not kind of imagining this as a possibility. It also doesn't feel, Yeah, so I'd say that the decision makers don't know what the possibilities are. You remember when Zuckerberg was testifying in the Senate, and one of the senators on the panel said, "Well, you don't even charge for this. How do you get any money?" It's like Zuckerberg actually smirked, which you never see him express a human emotion. I've watched this guy a lot, and to see Zuckerberg smirk, it's like, damn, they got through the Botox, and he actually expressed mirth at the senator that had no idea. So I think that's true. I think that the demography of the Senate, they look like me, and so they're not going to be especially attuned to thinking about how to use tech in a thoughtful way. I don't know if they even necessarily have the incentive to. A lot of the decision makers in business just don't know enough to know that this is possible. But those are my thoughts. It's probably wrong. I mean, I'm really enthusiastic about these social movements going on in the tech firms, because that's like, why did it take so long to happen, and why like now, bam, 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 every one of them, even Amazon, which was surprising to me.
So I'm struggling a little bit to form this question, so I'm hoping maybe I can just say some words and then you'll respond. But so to hear my liberal friends talk, it seems like a lot of the evil things that happen in the world are a result of the principle towards optimizing for shareholder profit.
Yeah.
So, it's really nice to think that there could be an alternative economy that's not organized around that. But I'm struggling to imagine what that would look like. So I'm curious, what is required? What are the confluence of factors that would have to occur for an economy to be organized around anything other than this profit maximization?
Yeah, no, it's. I think about that probably more than I should, because I'm morose and dark. So the short version of why there's so few IPOs, the sort of the Jerry version. So if you're of another mind, you'll say it's because of overregulation. The nanny state is crushing the entrepreneurial blah blah blah. But you look at the numbers from the Kauffman Foundation. Entrepreneurship has been dropping since 1977. They have this number called startup density, which is a proportion of businesses with at least one employee. So not that you claim on your taxes. I give talks now and then, so call that a business. But real businesses with an employee, the proportion that we have today is half what it was when Carter was president. And so the rate of startups is really weird. That to me is puzzling. For all the entrepreneurship scholars, I'd love to know what's the deal. Because if for $350,000 you can create a third of $1 billion category, like why the hell are there not just amazing innovations happening left and right in garages? Like it's really cheap to create a new business now, like cheaper than it's ever been in many categories, and yet it isn't happening. I think one of the reasons why in the US, why is it in Canada and not here? Because you'll notice that all the entrepreneurs in the US are white guys under the age of 26. It's because they have no college debt and they're still on their parents' health insurance. Like for a normal person, if you start a business and it fails, then you live in your car and your kids get taken away. So the U.S. is a very hostile climate to entrepreneurship, which is but I think what could enable sort of the creation of new institutions, one of the interesting possibilities is that capital equipment keeps getting really cheap, really good, and detached from industry in a sense. So this would take an hour to unpack, but like a CNC machine tool now costs, what a laser printer costs. Like the cost curve on CNC tools and 3D printers, everything is getting cheaper and better the way that laser printers did. And so it's pretty possible to imagine a future where every neighborhood has a universal fab facility that's collectively owned or owned by the municipal government or something like that. And entrepreneurs use the existing capital equipment to run their business, but they don't actually have to buy it. So what would that look like? Believing that government can do something valuable, re-believing in municipal government, having a better economic model of what those entities look like building them on a platform that isn't owned by shareholders. I mean, the weird thing about shareholder capitalism, as Ben was talking about yesterday, was shareholder capitalism drove firms to outsource everything, which then made the firms themselves largely redundant. like by Sony and others making it possible for third-party vendors to create televisions, that meant that a guy in Irvine, California can start a television company using that same sort of platform to create a new enterprise. So in some sense, it's like self-contradictory, which is why I think we are where we are now. Anyway, that was an even longer and more incoherent answer to your reasonable question, but those are some thoughts. Municipally based universal fabrication facilities, a social safety net that allows people to take risks in a way that doesn't lead to disaster if it fails. Vote Bernie? Vote Elizabeth Warren? I don't know.
Thank you, Jerry. It's a very inspiring talk. And my question is related to, like, if throughout your talk, so there's an alternative way of companies, of corporations, and they seem to be a sort of platform that connects a bunch of suppliers with the crowd, the consumers. Do you think we ultimately still need such kind of alternative organizations as like platforms of as opposite to the corporations, or eventually we can actually get rid of even platforms? Everybody is self-organized and we can transact with each other just freely. Do you think that's going to happen? Or that such kind of platforms will grow larger to that extent that they kind of monopolize the market eventually? So which one do you think is happening, or something else?
Yeah, no, I love that question. So I'm going to go super outside my depth here. It seems to me that platforms are completely like replaceable. Basically, they all largely look the same. In fact, there was a poster yesterday about how to create your own platform, right? It can't be that hard. Oh yeah, cool job. So it can't be that hard to replicate Uber. Come on. I mean, like, any business that was started by somebody in their dorm room can't be that hard to replicate, is my going in theory. What seems to be weird about the current version of platforms like Uber is that they're moving into the market as if they were natural monopolies, but they're not at all. So it seems like, why would Uber ever be a public corporation? Because they don't really, basically, they want to drive everyone else out of business by lasting as long as they can. But there's some inherent contradictions in their business model, because it's pretty easy to come up with an Uber knockoff. Call it Lyft or Juno. So I'm not opposed to platforms in principle. Like, if people are voluntarily choosing when they want to work and when they don't want to work, the good things that Mary Gray was talking about yesterday, like a lot of being able to control your schedule is a good thing. Like bidding for shifts, if you got paid well, that's not a terrible idea. I would love that idea of being able to choose when I was going to work. Like if there were some basic safety net and if I could have a reasonable life. So some combination of platforms, but basic level of decency in society to keep you from falling below the cracks, not being forced to use platforms, but as a voluntary thing. It seems like that's not a bad idea. And there's ways that you could make them locally based. They could all be sort of you could imagine creating white box software for taxis that basically every local town has their own version of a worker-owned taxi co-op where they build up ownership in the thing over time, and some billionaires created this really nice white box open source thing that could then be adapted, and when you land at the airport, it flips to the local, I don't know, but then there might be 5 competing taxi companies. So I have a full policy platform. Unlike Elizabeth Warren, I haven't thought this all the way through. But I think there's really, a platform to me is basically like the farmer's market. I mean, their value added is they've got these sheds where buyers and sellers can meet even if it's raining out, but that's it. I mean, they're basically a farmer's market. I think their value add beyond that is mostly stealing your data and gathering incriminating information about people going to bordellos or something. So. Oh, wait. Tom, everything I said is wrong. I'm sure of it.
No, actually, I'm going to say exactly the opposite. I really liked your talk. And, and here's the part I was trying hard to resist saying. What I wanted to say is I thought your talk was a great advertisement for my book, Superminds.
Oh.
Because, yeah.
As well as collectively owned local bookstores. Feminist book co-ops.
No, I really liked the way you presented all the things and all the choices. And I guess the tantalizing thing I would say, and you can react or not, I think a bunch of the things you talked about, there are kind of examples in my book. You talked about institutional trade-offs are not experienced as a choice. I think that's a really important point, and I tried to talk about that in one of the chapters in my book about what are the trade-offs among these different types of superminds. I think that it's not that you have to pick one. I think almost all real situations are combinations of multiple types of superminds, multiple ones of the three you listed and others. I think it's interesting to consider extreme possibilities. For instance, you were talking about how you could imagine a world where all the information could be in one place. And I actually did a thought experiment in my book about, and you were leading toward maybe it didn't have to be capitalism after all. I did a thought experiment in my book about what would happen if we had cyber socialism. And I think it's actually not completely crazy. I didn't advocate that it's a good thing necessarily, but I think it's a pretty intriguing possibility to consider that's now possible in ways that were never possible before with technology. But I guess the thing I wanted to say most, and I guess I'd be curious if you would agree with this, I think you would, is that I think what you were talking about, what I try to do in my book, are examples of something that I think, as Nikki said on the first day, I think it's perhaps more urgent than ever that we do this kind of thing. And I think we need to learn how to exercise systematically a kind of organizational or institutional or political imagination about how we can create new combinations of these things to achieve goals like what you have in your last bullet. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense. I mean, that's why it was so magical to see this group where everybody knows what API stands for, but they also know a lot of other stuff about how groups work and organizations group. It's like, this is the group that could take this on in a way that hardly any other assemblage could. And so, yeah, I think it's magical that you've brought this community together to create all the right minds in the room. And I've learned a lot about how you can get minds working together using nerdy apps through the various talks. So I'm kind of optimistic about that. My source of pessimism is Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and Washington, D.C. So 3 synecdoches or metonyms. Metonyms? Yeah. Anyway, 3 industrial districts, all of which seem so hopelessly corrupted and unsalvageable, and yet the source of so much power that it seems really clear. We're in an interesting place where definitely all of the forces are pointing towards circling the drain and not finally saving ourselves, which sounds gross and depressing, but it really is going to take an effort and some smart plans for sort of what comes next, like social movements like we're seeing in those Silicon Valley companies saying, we're not going to do this. You can't work without us. And to me, that's sort of the source of optimism. Good. Thanks.